So, I guess, what do you feel when you have a panic attack?
Oh, well, I've only had a couple panic attacks in my life. One, very vivid, very memorable, was in 1979 in the spring when I was getting on an airplane to fly back to Los Angeles for school at the end of spring break. And I just had an overwhelming a rush of adrenaline and fear.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think the fight or flight syndrome just kicked in all at one time, and I wanted to turn and run off the airplane. And it kind of came out of nowhere. It just was, I had had a flight home at Thanksgiving where we had an odd incident on, within probably 3 or 4 minutes of landing at SFO or out over the ocean or the bay.
Mm-hmm.
And somehow a downdraft hit our wing and turned the plane sideways, and then we leveled back off. But that experience sort of hung with me in my subconscious until the next spring when I took my next flight. And so the feeling was, well, actually, I have had other panic attacks now that I think about it.
Mm-hmm.
I've had panic attacks most recently on chairlifts.
Yep.
That's been the really the biggest one.
Mm-hmm.
And I have had skied my entire life. I've been on chairlifts my entire life. Never had a problem until I get into my 40s. And I had a panic attack on a chairlift. It was a very uncomfortable feeling that it just was extremely uncomfortable and anxious, and I wanted off of the chairlift to the point where I was almost willing to jump off the chair to stop that feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, jumping off the chair
Is exactly what you're afraid of, right? The falling?
yeah, but if I did it, I wouldn't have that feeling
Right,
anymore.
yeah.
And it was, so I ended up having to hold on to the chairlift and with all my might to stop me from doing what I was urged to do, which was to jump off of it to stop that feeling.
Mm-hmm.
It's horrible. Horrible, horrible feeling. I've had that experience on soaring over California as well, dangling my feet.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have to kind of stop myself and start putting in place coping mechanisms just to get through the experience.
So what kind of coping mechanisms do you use?
With the soaring over California, I turned my body sideways and stopped looking at the screen to eliminate some of the visual stimuli
Right.
of the experience, which contributed to the anxiety.
Well, yeah, I mean, it looks like you're dangling over stuff.
Yes.
Yeah.
It contributed. But I don't think that was the sole thing. I think if they didn't have the screen there at all, for some reason, being up in the air and having my feet dangle has caused this reaction that I've never had before.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a big one. And the chairlifts, for some reason, the feet dangling is a part of it. Because when I'm on a chairlift that has the bar that comes down and you can put your feet on it,
Oh.
I don't seem to have the same reaction.
Okay.
I seem to be able to sort of rationalize myself into being more calm.
What about a gondola?
No problems in a gondola.
Huh. Interesting. So you could go skiing someplace like North Star, right? Maybe.
Yeah, if I just gondola it up and back, gondolas usually are one run. But yeah, I would have a problem with the gondola. I have had some anxiety around being in open space, in nature, where the vistas around me are vast. If you've been in San Francisco, there's a place you can take a walk to, and there's a piece of land that juts out into the bay. It's between the Pacific Ocean and the Golden Gate Bridge. And there's a, what do they call them, Labyrinth?
Is that the San Francisco puzzle?
It's...
The aquatic park?
No, it's not a puzzle. It's one of those rock things that you can walk around to try to get to the middle, but it's just little rocks out on the edge. Oh. I show you, it's a beautiful walk. It's absolutely gorgeous out there, but you're surrounded by visual stimuli from here to here, and it's vast and it's big, and I get kind of overwhelmed at times by it. I say, and you're up again high, looking down on the ocean, but you're in a solid footing and everything. But for some reason, that overwhelming visual stimuli sometimes can cause me to be anxious.
I never saw you get that way in Yosemite.
No, but that was a few years back. I haven't been to Yosemite for a while, and I wonder about that too. But Yosemite's a little more confined. I mean, when it's really wide open, like when I crawl to the top of a hill, and you're looking, at a
you
very
would
vast
hate Cloud's
expanse.
Rest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's something that I think there's a mental component to it, but there's also a physiological component that, you have fluid in your ears and, different things. So, the panic attack is an overwhelming feeling of anxiety that you want to run away from and have it stop now. And how you get it to stop. I was taught in my Fear of Flying class that you can't be anxious and relaxed at the same time. So if you focus on your breathing and you do take deep breaths and hold it and let it out slowly, you will calm your body down and you will be able to get yourself to a better spot mentally. But you have to be committed to taking your attention off of the thought process, which is triggering your anxiety, and putting it on an activity that is going to take you out of the place you don't want to be. And that takes practice.
Okay. So those are actually, at least in my experience, a couple of different things. One is the biofeedback. That's what Kelsey did, right? Where you're actually focusing on physically calming yourself down, whether or not your thoughts are following. And then the other thing is trying to get your thoughts off of that process.
Yes.
And both, I think, help.
Yes. And when we did the Fear of Flying clinic, we had a behavioral counselor on staff, and she taught us, well, first of all, the approach for fearful flyers was twofold. One, it was education about the flying process. We went to air traffic control, went to regional air traffic control, the tower. We went to the United Airlines maintenance facility. We had pilots speak to us. We had flight attendants speak to us. We had mechanics speak to us. We learned more about the flying process, so that when we got to that spot where we were afraid, we had some information to fall back on that would allow us to start to change our thought patterns. And
because you can't let your thoughts completely run away if you actually know the facts behind it, right?
Right. And the other thing is, we then worked on changing our dialogue in our head. And I will tell you, I did it one time on a flight when I was first getting back into flying, and I was having some fairly major anxiety getting ready for takeoff. I started a mantra in my head where I told myself, even though I didn't, it wasn't that I didn't believe it, it's that I had conditioned myself for so many years to have a different thought process that I was fighting my own thought process. But I told myself the positive things, and the primary one was, I said, this is not the defining moment of my life, which is really, it would be if you crash, but you're really telling yourself you're not going to crash.
Yeah.
And that was my mantra, was this is not the defining moment.
Well, that's cognitive behavioral therapy. That's a really hard thing to do.
Yeah,
To change your thought process like that. It feels very unnatural for
yes,
a while. But it works.
But
it does.
works.
Yeah.
It really does work. Kyle, so that's what I did, and that's been my coping mechanism, was to, first of all, was to educate myself a bit on the process. And, you know, when you have people who care teaching you,
Mm-hmm.
and you feel their compassion, their empathy, and their love of flying, it really, it's inspiring. You don't want to let them down for all the efforts that they put into helping you get over your problem. So there's a group aspect to the thing too that was helpful.
Okay.
But in terms of just, yeah, biofeedback, if that's what I was doing, cognitive behavioral
So
therapy.
yeah, the changing your pattern of thoughts is the cognitive behavioral stuff.
Yeah.
And then the physically making yourself feel better so that hopefully your thoughts will follow. That's the biofeedback stuff.
Yeah, yeah, those are two pretty good. I mean, without knowing what the labels were, those were the things that I was putting into play.
Well, yeah, that's why they recommend them, because that's what works.
Yeah.
So
And
I've noticed you do a tapping thing too. Does that
yes,
help?
it does help. On takeoff, I tap my foot to about 200.
Okay.
And count rhythmically to 200, and it's a ritual that I've developed that helps me focus on the tapping and not focus on what's going on around me. And I feel that by the time I hit 200, the plane's high enough up that if they have an issue, they can circle back around. And, you know, even though
They don't have issues, but yeah.
Logically, it doesn't make any sense because, yeah, they don't have issues. Just statistically, it's extremely rare. I mean, there is the Scully incident where, you know, they suck birds into the engine, and that's, you know, but that's very rare that the birds even cause a problem. You know, they've shot frozen turkeys into airplane engines.
Oh, really?
And the performance of the plane, of the engine is
been fine.
still outstanding. That's one of the videos they showed us in the class.
Oh.
Shooting a frozen turkey into a moving jet engine, and watching the performance level on a graph and show how it dips and then comes right back. So the fact that a flock of planes cause problems, and that was, I'm sure they're studying it and trying to figure out how that must have been a heck of a flock, you know.
Right, yeah.
In both engines.
And even though that happened, I mean, he landed the plane and everybody lived.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that was a really good outcome.
So that's, you know, I don't know how you translate that into an app. I think the app, what would be interesting would be if the app recognized you were having a panic attack by the vital signs that you were demonstrating, and if you could then look at the app and have it flash the reminders of the coping techniques you need to employ now, and we're monitoring your biofeedback. Are you breathing? And having a program for breathing that you follow on your watch, because now you're looking at your watch and you're distracting yourself from the very thing that's causing you the anxiety. That might be an interesting app.
So our hope is to have it be more of like a Swiss Army knife. So like a lot of little things that you could organize which was most effective for you. So if you push the button, that's what'll come up first. So I've seen little clocks where it's just a second hand. There's no minute or hour or anything. It's just the second hand, and it ticks out, instead of, you know, numbers or like little tick marks, like blue, 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 green, 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 green for breathe in for these seconds, breathe out for these seconds, and it just keeps going.
Yeah.
And then so having it detect when you're having a panic attack is tough, because you could just be exercising, you know, and have your heart rate be up and you be sweaty